Thank you, Kristen, thank you, James, and thank you, Anne, and everyone else who helped put this event together, Long Beach Progressive Evolution and the Environmental 99%. It's an honor for us to be here with other people who are, really doing practical work in terms of co-ops. My name is Andrea Iannone, and I'll let you introduce yourself in a second. But we're from Democracy at Work, Los Angeles. Democracy at Work is a national nonprofit. It's based in New York City, and it was co-founded by Richard D. Wolff, who's an economist, and he currently teaches at the New School University in New York City. You may be familiar with him because he has a show. It's called Economic Update. It's also a podcast. It's downloadable, and it's on 90.7 FM on KPFK. I think it's 9 a.m. on Sunday mornings. So what Democracy at Work in general does, and what we do as one of the many action groups across the globe, is we try to spread the word about cooperatives and why we think they are a solid pathway towards a more just economic system. So that being said, we are going to take you on a journey across the world and back through time in order to come back to the United States nowadays. So if you could just go ahead with the slide. I'm just going to set the scene real fast. In a world. It's my favorite part. All right, so there. All right. So we have 4 images, right, on this slide. From the top left, we have the Seattle anti-World Trade Organization protests in 1997. 99. And 99, yeah. And then on the top right, we have Occupy Wall Street, which was across the world in 2011. And I'm guessing in the bottom left corner, that man needs no introduction. And I think we have the outlier in the bottom right corner. That is the World Economic Forum, which takes place in Davos, and it took place this year in January. But all these 4 images are linked because the people in them share the same concerns. Then that is that rising inequality threatens the world economy. And we're going to see why that is. But the World Economic Forum this year released a report saying that the main causes of rising inequality were, it was especially deregulation and anti-union and anti-labor practices and automation. So these 3 factors are leading to an increase in global inequality. And so if we could keep going. In the meantime, as we know, inequality keeps rising. So Oxfam, a British charity, released a report this year to amend the report from last year, from 2016, in which they found that only 8 people, and that's a group of people that includes Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, they own as much wealth as the bottom half of the world population. That's 3.6 billion people. So these 8 dudes, because they're all dudes, they can all fit on that golf cart, all right? And they can go have a good time together with all their money. Well, 3.6 billion people in the world don't have access, to what they do, or not even a fraction of that. If we can keep going, of the 100 wealthiest entities in the world, 69 are corporations and only 31 are countries. Just to give you an idea, Apple takes in more revenue than the world's 180 poorest countries, and there's Ireland, Greece, and Israel in that group. ExxonMobil is wealthier than Switzerland, it's wealthier than Norway, it's wealthier than Russia. Nowadays we're all taught to be scared of Russia, right? And Walmart is the 10th wealthiest entity in the world, yet it provides instructions on how to apply for food stamps to its new employees. So, as Americans, we love to export democracy, right? But maybe we should think of importing democracy into places such as the workplace, because that way we can redistribute how wealth is created. And that's what we're going to get at. We can keep going. As you may know, in the traditional enterprise, sorry.
Hello everyone, I'm Liz Phillips. I'm going to take over for a little bit and hand it back to Andrea. Okay, so here we go. Let's talk about the solution that we're offering. The traditional enterprise, as you can see, you have a boss, a CEO, and or a board of directors. It's usually 12 or 15 people in large multinationals, and they make all the decisions and keep most of the profits. Can we go to the next slide? What we suggested is the cooperative one. In a co-op, everyone gets the same share, they get the same vote, everyone is clearly happier here. Fireworks, yay. So this is proven by research though, not just fun graphics. The New Economics Foundation is a British think tank, and they recently had a well-being at work report, which found that improving relationships at work, increasing the amount of work that employees can self-manage, and reevaluating how salaries are distributed amongst employees can maximize workplace well-being. Seems pretty obvious, and that's what's built into the cooperative model. So how we kind of like to think about it is a traditional capitalist business uses labor to make capital, but a worker co-op can use capital to create labor. So it's basically a system designed to create prosperity rather than to extract wealth. So go ahead. So here we are defining a cooperative. There's no real legal US definition. There's variance in the terms. It's a little unclear, but under California law, a cooperative must be run for the benefit of its members. Basically, in order to use the word cooperative or any of its derivatives, a business must be legally registered as one of the following types. I'm sorry, before that, here are the principles of worker cooperatives. There's voluntary open membership, democratic member control, cooperation among cooperatives, autonomy and independence, member economic participation, concern for the community, and education, training, and information. Keep going. So let's talk about the types of worker co-ops. So at the top, we have consumer co-ops. So that's a co-op that's owned and controlled by the people who buy the goods or services. So examples of that are REI, credit unions, also technically are consumer co-ops. Co-opportunity in Los Angeles, so Santa Monica, and a new location in Culver City. They're a grocery store, they're a consumer co-op. And that's the co-op that exists the most in the United States. So that's usually the thing people think about most, like, oh, that hippie grocery store down the stairs. Yeah, that's a great place. That's the co-op they think of. But there's a few other types as well. So producer co-op, that's basically where producers have banded together to have a greater market share. So Dairy Farmers of America, they are individual dairy farmers who pool their products together to basically command more of the market. There's also purchasing co-ops. So they band together to improve their purchasing power. So Ace Hardware, for example, it's much cheaper to buy nails in bulk and then distribute it amongst different Ace Hardwares than be able to sell it at a more competitive price. The next slide. Then there's also multi-stakeholders. So these are kind of a combination. They are owned and controlled by both members and workers. Boystock here is a really fascinating example of a multi-stakeholder. They are a logging company in Quebec, Canada. And their company changed owners many times, went bankrupt 3 times, and finally the workers and their families and the entire small town surrounding it, they realized that their small town so utterly relied on the success of this company that they pulled together and took it over themselves. And it has now been very profitable, and they've been enjoying success since the 1980s. And they really saved their small town that really depended on this logging company. And then worker cooperative. So this is the one that, that we advocate for the most, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the biggest and the best or the most important. So you see there's reasons for all of these. But the worker co-op is owned and democratically controlled by employees. So examples like Mondragon, which we'll talk about in a second. The Cooperative Home Care Association is the largest worker co-op in the US. And the Alvarado Street Bakery in Northern California. Pacific Electric is a worker co-op in Los Angeles that does electrician work. Next slide. So co-ops are not employee stock option programs, though a lot of people sometimes like to take the credit for being a co-op when they're actually an ESOP. So Bob's Red Mill and Disney, for example, they both offer stock option programs, and then Nestle employees have ownership. But it's a passive ownership. They don't own any assets. They don't even add up to a majority ownership of the stock usually. They're not legally entitled to know any financial statements. They don't get a vote in anything other than like really big things like mergers and acquisitions and liquidations. So essentially you own a part of a trust fund which will pay you out when you retire. So it's not a bad thing, but it's definitely not as good as it could be, and it's not a real ownership. It's not like you own your pants that you're wearing right now, you get to decide when you take it off. You know, it's not the same as the ESOP. Basically now, and again, we like to say that we're not blind worker cultists, so all of these different forms have their reason to exist. For example, there was a recent campaign for Twitter, which people said should be made into a consumer co-op, which makes sense. I mean, the benefits of Twitter mostly go to the users, like the journalists who use Twitter all the time. It wouldn't make as much sense for the workers to profit on it because they actually, I mean, they are affected by it, but the consumers of Twitter are affected by it more. So that was a campaign that rose and fell, but next slide. But in essence, really, one person gets one vote in a worker co-op. So the janitor, Mr. Burns, equally get one vote, which is the biggest thing that we want to advocate for. So brief history. Co-ops, they are not a new idea. They've existed for a very long time. And they're often used as a form of community self-help. So, for example, mutual aid and cooperatives are a big part of Black history here in the US. So racism and inequality have created countless situations where men and women had no choice but to band together to help themselves, and cooperatives have been a really big part of that. So W.B. Du Bois has a great quote about co-ops here. Cooperatives would provide the economic opportunities denied to African Americans and would allow Blacks to serve the common good rather than be slaves to market forces. He was a very big advocate of it at his time. So the background image here, which can't see too well, but it's a picture of the Chesapeake Marine Railway and Dry Dock Company. They have a great story. They existed between 1865 and 1883, a long time ago. But it's African-American caulkers who owned their own cooperative. Basically, Baltimore had become famous for its caulking of ships, and it was the Black caulkers who were the most proficient in the state. But white laborers were not happy with the Black workforce, and mobs regularly attacked Black caulkers on their way home, and white carpenters boycotted shipyards where they employed Black caulkers. So a group of Black men decided that they needed to own their own shipyards to protect themselves and secure their jobs. So they created this cooperative that was successful for many decades. And they actually bought property that included the very spot where Frederick Douglass described sitting on a cellar door to study from a stolen spelling book and teaching himself to read. So that was the property that he went to read at. And it closed after a little bit for multiple reasons, but including some people who were really just trying to take them down, which they kind of did in the end. But it had about 2 decades of great success. And it really was a big force in putting stop on white laborers who were trying to drive out Black laborers from lots of other different fields in Baltimore. Can we continue? Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, can you go back one more? Probably. So utility co-ops too. This is fascinating. So in the mid-1930s, 9 out of 10 rural homes in the US didn't have electricity. Power companies ignored these areas because it wasn't profitable. They had to build a lot of infrastructure to reach people, and they wouldn't have a big return. So the New Deal changed that. Basically, FDR's administration created a lending program for this infrastructure to be built. But even with that, investor-owned utility companies still weren't interested, still didn't offer the profits they wanted. But farmers, they poured in applications saying, yes, we will take that loan, we will build this infrastructure. So that made it clear to FDR and his administration that consumer cooperatives would be the entities that would actually electrify rural America. So they created the Electric Cooperative Cooperation Act, which is a model law for states to adopt, which enabled the formation and operation of not-for-profit and consumer-owned electric cooperatives. And they still exist today. There are, in fact, 838 of them still existing that provide service to 42 million people in 47 different states. So with a success story like this, it's a really frustrating thing for me to sometimes hear like on NPR, oh, rural America doesn't have access to the internet. How will we ever get it there? Like, the model is already in existence. All right, next slide, please. So the Rochdale Pioneers are another big example of success with worker cooperatives. So they opened a general store in England in the mid-1800s, but from the very beginning, they had much bigger plans. So, and their model has been, their success has been a model of inspiration for almost 150 years now. And I want to mention 3 big lessons that we think are important to take away from their story. Number 1 is social justice. They tied social justice into their business from the very beginning. So women were owner members and had the right to vote in their worker cooperatives 80 years before they actually had the right to vote in the British parliamentary system. And they were critical to the movement which legalized the right for married women to keep their own wages instead of having it go to their husbands. And they also boycotted the U.S. Cotton during the American Civil War in support of fighting against slavery. And so they really just directly tied their business to their moral principles. Number 2 is their politics. They actually had to change existing legislation many times on the way for them to create what they did. And they actually even eventually created their own political party to advocate for their needs. This party also still exists. It's the 4th largest party in the House of Commons in England and has 27 sitting members in Parliament right now and works very closely with the Labour Party. And then number 3, the other big lesson is the importance of a network. So they needed goods to sell in their store, so they built factories to make them. Their members needed housing, so they built housing. They needed ships to move their goods, they built a shipping company. They needed insurance, they built their own insurance company. They needed a bank, they built a bank. They wanted a union, so they made a union. They created what they needed. And then since each part of their network needed each other, they all grew together. It really made them stronger and much more self-reliant. And the bank and the union they created still exist today. Next slide, please. Mondragon is another very well-cited worker co-op example. They're the largest worker co-op to date. They started in 1955 in the Basque region of Spain, and they were the first worker co-op in what would, it started as one co-op and would later become the Mondragon Corporation. So don't cringe at the word corporation, because it's actually a federation of 257 smaller cooperatives, which includes a credit union and electronics and appliance manufacturing, research and development firms, schools. It's really based on the founding principles of humanism, solidarity, and participation. And their network, mimicked on the Rochdale example, is what gives them their self-reliance to maintain that mission. The research and development co-ops help maintain their competitiveness. They structurally link their cooperatives, which helps them with stability. So in times of recession or just hard times in general, they can actually shuffle their workers from co-ops to co-ops. Like if one that's helping prosper more, they can just send some workers over there for a little bit. And then also the credit unions remove their outside financial reliance on other institutions. So, and their success, here's a few numbers. They employ 74,000 people. And they have a total of $22 billion in assets and $15 billion in revenue. They're doing pretty well. Keep going. So in the US, we haven't talked about the US yet. Historically, US co-ops, a little bit of it, but historically, US co-ops have been tied to the labor movement. So more notably than the Knights of Labor and the IWW, the National Workers, so of the world, yeah. But the Knights of Labor, they began in 1869 and had 700,000 members by 86, and they advocated for the 8-hour workday and the abolition of child labor and equal pay. They did a lot of good work in their day, and they also advocated for cooperatives. So they actually use them a lot as a tool during strikes to provide workers a form of income while they were striking in the agribusiness. And then the IWW, the Wobblies, they follow too. They advocated for co-ops as well. But the tactic of creating a co-op to provide income for striking workers is actually still used. Collective copies is an example of that. In the 80s, workers at a printing company went on strike with the help of United Electrical Union, and after the strike finished, collective copies remained. It kept going, and it actually, later down the road, bought out the original company the workers were striking against later. So, though we do want to do a little disclaimer, it's important to learn from the successes and failures of these past organizations, so we want to acknowledge that for all the good Knights of Labor did, they were also racist, mostly against Chinese immigrants, so that's not something we support, and we wholly disagree with their views and tactics on that front. So now I'm going to get back to Andrea.
All right, so where are we now, right, with co-ops in the U.S.? They're spreading. There are over 29,000 cooperatives of all different kinds all across the U.S., and they employ about 800,000 people. The majority are consumer co-ops, and only 500, though, of all the co-ops in the U.S. are worker cooperatives. They employ about 7,000 people, and they generate $400 million in revenue, approximately. Here are some examples of worker cooperatives. The Arizmendi Association of Cooperatives, that's 6 bakeries and 1 incubator, and I'll get to what that means in a second, but they are in the San Francisco Bay Area. And the incubator basically helps anyone who would like to open an Arizmendi franchise to do so. We cited previously the Cooperative Home Care Associates. That's the largest worker co-op in the U.S. It has 2,000 employees, or worker owners, and that's in New York City. And then the last notable example that we wanted to cite was Evergreen Cooperatives. They're relatively recent. I think they started in, 2015, or more or less, in Cleveland, Ohio. And the reason they're significant is that they really took advantage of what is known as, or what are known as, anchor institutions. Anchor institutions are places like a university or a hospital that are firmly rooted in a city, and they generate a lot of need for services, and that's the need that Evergreen filled. The Cleveland Foundation and then the General Hospital in Cleveland needed a laundry service, so in came this worker cooperative that started doing laundry, and then they've expanded to a couple different things. They're trying to become more and more profitable. They do solar panel installation and insulation, in retrograding buildings or retrofitting buildings, for better energy consumption. If we could go on. So what's the issue, though? Why are there not more worker co-ops? Well, the major issue is one of funding. Ever since the Great Recession in 2008, capitalists, or big industrialists and banks, have been sitting on loads and loads of cash. Okay, like they got the bailouts, right, which we didn't get. And they've been too scared to invest, to put it simply. And overseas profits, which have become a greater and greater share of most major companies, have been kept overseas or in offshore tax havens. So they're not getting reinvested into the US market, right? That's why you hear, a certain president complaining about the corporate tax rate. Oh, it's too high, which, is a bunch of BS, but that's besides the point. Just to give you some figures, certain estimates think there's about $4 trillion that are not being reinvested into the U.S. market, okay? So that's really the main issue, besides the fact that banks are kind of loath to give a loan application to 40 people, right? It's not that easy to have 40 people be the principal owners of the business. All right, let's keep going. It's probably useful to analyze what other places in the world where there are greater co-op sectors, what other places have done. In 1985, Italy passed the Marcora law, and it was named after the finance minister at the time. Basically, the gist is when a worker goes on unemployment, he or she can choose to take monthly installments or to collect all of their unemployment insurance, all the unemployment insurance that is due to them, and invest it in a worker cooperative. The second flag down that list is a place that maybe you would not associate with progressive and revolutionary social ideals. That's the flag of Rojava in Syria. And in 2014, the Kurdish people of Rojava in Syria adopted a new constitution. And it's a very exciting experiment because a large section, about 80% of the region's economy, is run cooperatively. And co-ops there provide the most necessary services such as food and water and et cetera, et cetera. But what's really exciting is that in Rojava they've applied the cooperative model to government and to politics. So any body of government, from the neighborhood council, the equivalent of the neighborhood council, to the ministries, are run cooperatively, so with direct input from the citizens. And each committee in whatever body of government exists is co-chaired by a man and a woman. So that's pretty exciting, to associate that with a place that we usually associate with a major outflux of refugees and civil war. Yet there is large civil progress as well. Later, the next down is the UK flag, obviously. In 2016, Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party put out a proposal which was known as the right to own policy. And the right to own policy of the Labour Party establishes what is known as the right of first refusal, which is an exciting concept because according to this idea, it's not yet a law, okay? If Labour gets into government, they may pass it. But it says when a company is being sold, the workers of that company should have the right of first refusal. So they should be given the chance to buy it and to say yes or no, we don't want it. If they do say yes, then the government, the UK government, would finance the purchase of that company with a loan at a very low interest rate so that the workers could take over the company and make it profitable in the long run. Okay, last one. This isn't really elsewhere in the world, but we got a little excited. We had a meeting yesterday with Divest LA and Public Bank LA, and they are currently writing the public banking charter. They hope that the city of Los Angeles, when divesting from banks such as Wells Fargo, will fund a municipally owned public bank, and that bank will then invest in cooperatives. And as towards the end, we'll see why that is important. All right, so let's keep going.
They actually spoke here last month.
Oh.
Both them then,
Yeah, awesome. All right, so why are they important, right? Like, why are we here, talking about this? Great. Co-ops reduce inequality. That's where we started from, and that's where we want to get back to. Several studies have shown that cooperatives invigorate the communities in which they're in. The United Nations, through the World Bank and the United Nations Development Program, has been promoting worker co-ops as a pathway to development. So especially in East Africa and Southeast Asia. And this isn't, again, it's not anything new. They've been doing this since the 80s in Tanzania and Kenya, where they've been establishing marketing co-ops for agricultural goods so that the farmers can get a bigger market share. But going back to inequality, in Mondragon, the average pay differential between the highest paid worker and the lowest paid worker is, the lowest paid and the highest paid is 1 to 5, okay? While in General Electric, which is more or less comparable by sector, it's 1 to, 202. So it's way off the charts, okay? It's completely off the charts. All right, let's keep going. So co-ops increase stability. They increase the economic stability of a community. As you've seen previously with the example Liz cited of Boissaco in Quebec, communities become more self-reliant and resilient thanks to cooperatives. And capitalist economies have booms and busts, right? And you are all familiar with the latest bust, that was the 2008 Great Recession. So what worker co-ops do is that 90% of them are still around after the first 5 years, while it's only 3 to 5% of traditional businesses, okay? So that's why we have a happy peering mean right there. So other two key findings from a major study by Virginie Perrotin, who's a professor at the Leeds University Business School in the UK, found that worker cooperatives were more productive than conventional businesses, and that the company itself, retained a larger share of the profit than traditional businesses. And one simple reason for that is that not as much goes into bonuses for major executives. So ultimately, cooperatives are a way to mitigate the problem of inequality because they redistribute not just wealth, but also the means of producing that wealth. New York City certainly thought so in 2014 when they invested $1.4 million in the formation of new cooperatives. And the following year, they doubled that amount. And in 2014, there were 23 registered co-ops in New York City. By 2016, there were 61, so the amount had nearly tripled. I mean, it's pretty amazing. So as we wrap up, we just wanted to leave you with some words of wisdom. They're by Richard Wolff, again, the founder of Democracy at Work. Democratizing the economy can yield the kind of economic and social results that capitalism has long promised, but increasingly fails to deliver. We hope that inspires you as much as it inspired us as just volunteers to get to learn more about this model and learn why it has incredible social benefits and why it is one of the many ways in which we can progress towards a better society for all of us. Keep in touch if you like what you heard and if you want to learn more. That's, sorry, next slide. Yeah, that's our website right there, democracyatwork-la.com. And that's our email, losangeles@democracyatwork.info. We host monthly meetings in Santa Monica, and we have a bunch of contents online. So yeah, stay in touch. Thank you very much.